back to the Young Turks. Now joining us is Jonah Edleman. He is a CEO of the organization known as Stand for Children. He is also one of the top education reform activists in the country, and he has worked on legislation in several states to improve our public education system. Jonah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to talk to you about what's going on in Illinois right now. But before we do that, give me a little information about Stand for Children. What does your organization do exactly to help reform the public education system in the U.S.?
You could describe Stand for Children as a cross between the NRA and the PTA. We're a voice of parents and educators committed to improving outcomes for students, in particular ensuring that kids graduate high school ready for college and post-secondary. Other post-secondary options, which are critical to making a decent living these days. We have 9 state affiliates. In each affiliate, we're actively focused on improving state laws and rules and investments in order to make schools better for kids.
No, I love that. And, you compared yourself to the NRA, which, I find a little questionable because the NRA is basically a propaganda machine. But how would you compare yourself to the NRA? I'm just curious about that.
Oh, the analogy is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but basically the notion is that there are all these parents out there who feel really strongly about public education, but they are not well organized. And, when you come together and you have a strong voice of people and you're very committed to a cause, you can get political results if you are strategic. And, points taken around the NRA, but there's no doubt that that is a very powerful organization that has been able to hold sway in the policy arena. Not supporting ideas that I agree with, but I think that type of clout needs to be brought to bear for students in this country who are, being undereducated at an alarming rate, and at a point in time where it's so clear that you need to be decently educated to have a good life. A quarter of kids are dropping out of high school. What are folks going to do if you don't have a high school degree? I mean, basically, for a lot of kids, that's a pathway to prison or early pregnancy or a life of poverty. So we have to do a lot better for kids these days, and it's going to come down to parents making it a priority with their own children and for all children to ensure the system improves.
Right, Jonah, I agree with you. I think that it would be great if we can be as influential as the NRA when it comes to something that's actually important. When it comes to education reform. Now, let's move on to Illinois. Tell me what's going on with SB 7. Now, this is legislation that would basically reform public education in the state. Tell me how it would reform education. What are the major components of this legislation?
Well, a couple things. So Senate Bill 7 would make performance a priority when it comes to teaching in the state. The status quo right now in Illinois and across the country is that key decisions about who's teaching our children are based primarily on seniority, and that's just wrong. And so around the country, when layoffs have to happen, and unfortunately they're happening a lot, districts go down a list based on years of service rather than based on who's getting the most results for kids. And so Senate Bill 7 would change that. Layoffs would be based primarily on performance, as with the granting of tenure. And very importantly, principals would be able to hire based on performance of teachers. They'd be able to hire who they want, which would effectively prevent ineffective teachers from being bounced around school districts. And finally, the dismissal process for ineffective teachers who have tenure would be streamlined substantially. Currently in Illinois, it's a 15-step process that lasts, on average, more than 2 years and costs more than $200,000 in legal fees, and that's just wrong. What ends up happening not only is that ineffective teachers stay in the classroom, and really to the detriment of students, because teachers have such an incredible impact on students. We can't afford to have a single student in a classroom of a teacher that we know is ineffective. But also it affects the whole culture of a school, so that principals give up on evaluation. Evaluation isn't meaningful. And a lot of teachers who are doing a decent job working hard don't get the feedback they need to improve. So this would change culture as well as change the rules.
Now, Jonah, I love that because I think that it's really important to evaluate teachers and, basically fire those who are deemed ineffective rather than fire those who are new teachers who could be very effective, okay? So I think that this legislation is very important. Now, typically, teachers' unions are against this type of legislation, right, okay? But you guys managed to get the support of teachers' unions.
Right.
How did you do that?
Well, I mean, we came to the state, and the state has a reputation. We've helped pass similar legislation in other states, and came to the state as a very credible advocate. And we're able to build a very influential base of supporters, tens of thousands of folks who support our agenda, and amass a level of political resources, more than $3 million, that really changed the tenor of the debate, changed the balance of power. And then, to the union's credit, when we developed the Performance Counts proposal with Advance Illinois, which is a terrific Illinois-based group with whom we're partnering, they, rather than fighting it tooth and nail, as has happened in other states, they came to the negotiating table in very good faith, and over the course of a few months, we went through provision by provision of performance counts and agreed on layoffs, agreed on tenure, agreed on streamlined dismissal, agreed on principal hiring, and agreed on some very sensible reforms to the way teacher contracts are negotiated that will enable, finally, Chicago Public Schools to substantially increase its school day and year, which currently are the shortest in the country for any major urban district. So I feel great about the content of Senate Bill 7 in terms of what will happen for students and for teachers, as well as the process, because we avoided a polarizing, divisive conflict like you've seen in so many states this year.
Jonah, now, what I'm very curious about is how you plan on evaluating these teachers. Right. I mean, the Los Angeles Times was under fire for the way that they evaluated teachers in the Los Angeles Unified School District, and it's because they mainly focused on standardized test results. Is that what schools are planning on doing in Chicago or in Illinois? Last
year, 2010, the legislature passed what's called the Performance Evaluation Reform Act, PERA, and similarly, it was all the stakeholders coming together, and currently they are at the table, the teachers' unions and advocates and school management groups, developing the evaluation framework for not only teachers but also principals. Student academic progress is a factor. It will be a significant factor according to legislation. What percentage of a teacher's rating will be based on student academic progress, and how to define student academic progress are being debated and decided now. I personally don't like the idea of student academic progress according to standardized tests being the only measure, and that's not what we support. We support multiple measures, qualitative measures, classroom observation of how well a teacher manages the classroom, plans, engages students, student learning, the safety of the classroom, the classroom climate, are just so key. And there's a lot of consensus around how to evaluate teachers, and there needs to be, more diligent, effective classroom evaluations happening, which when you tie the evaluations to consequences, as Senate Bill 7 does, as we were talking about earlier, you encourage more rigorous evaluations. You encourage a culture of evaluation. So, across the country, states are grappling with the details of how to evaluate teacher performance, but the bottom line is it's going to be a mix of outcomes, according to either standardized tests or other forms of student work and observation.
All right. Now, the Senate in Illinois has passed this legislation. We're waiting for the House to see whether or not they would be willing to pass the legislation. And what I love is that your organization is willing to rewrite the bill and rewrite the legislation so it does actually pass in Illinois. And I think that that's extremely important because it could serve as a model for other states in the country. And education reform is something that is so important and necessary in the United States. Jonah, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.